Welcome to Evangelicalish, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the American evangelical church, deconstruction, faith, and God's love through it all. Join us for these episodes live on our Evangelicalish YouTube page on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 o'clock Pacific. Let's journey together.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live pod recording of Evangelicalish. I'm Paul.
I'm April.
And I'm Jeremy.
Almost as if we rehearsed it. Beautiful. Glad you guys are with us tonight. We have a great guest. I wasn't sure if you guys would be here, though, because I thought you would all be in Kentucky getting revived.
Oh, stop. No, or raptured. Remember?
Or
February
raptured.
15th.
Right.
Yeah,
Came and went, and we're all still here.
we were supposed to get raptured. We didn't get raptured, but yes, I thought about going to the revival. Actually, for the pre-show get together, I was in the Asbury Zoom waiting room, and then realized I was in the wrong spot. So I figured I might try
behind.
Yeah, I got left behind. So I tried to catch a little bit of Jesus. See if the magic dust would rub off on me, but it didn't work. So.
I kind of thought maybe all the Christians were going to disappear on February 15th, and I was kind of looking forward to that.
Oh,
well, we'll still go with it. Well, glad everybody's with us. We've got a great guest, great show tonight. I want to tell you, next week, many of you have been hearing about 1946, the movie.
Yes.
It's pretty much produced. I got the really awesome treat of hanging out with Rocky Roggio, the producer and kind of the star of the documentary, and her production partner down in LA. Rocky's going to be our guest next Wednesday on the pod. You're not going to want to miss that. We also have Brian McLaren coming up with us on March 22nd. And last thing of housework before we get going on tonight's show, go to evangelicalish.com, join our Ish community. And if you go on there now, you can hear our Ish Unplugged podcast. That's our podcast just for our Ish community. And you can hear about my mushroom trip on my recent spiritual trip, and learn all about why, how, and what happened when I did mushrooms as a part of a spiritual journey. So that's evangelicalish.com for our community there. And that's how we are working to help fund what we do. And so if you appreciate the message and what we do here at Evangelicalish, we're not going to start asking you to tithe to help us build a building or build a 20-car garage like Joel Osteen recently did. But we would love it if you would help us to feed our children from time to time. And you can do that through subscriptions on Evangelical.
Feed our children.
Yes, we want to raise money for hungry children.
Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Okay. That's what that felt like.
No manipulation or
no, not manipulative. Jesus was being very serious. Yeah. So samesies.
Jesus had wealthy women funding his ministry. We got to find a couple of those maybe.
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's still a wage gap in the United States, so they're tougher to find. Super excited about that episode. Super excited about tonight's episode as well. Really excited about tonight's episode.
Yeah. April, tell us who we got.
okay. So I am very biased for this guest because she's like my real life friend. If you've seen any of my skits about cringy church experience, if I say based on a true story, more than likely it might have been at this church where me and her were friends. But she is so much more than just my friend, even though that's her number one role for me. But Adele is a somatic-based psychotherapist, certified trauma professional, and spiritual integrationist. Adele is a sought after speaker on topics of religious trauma, complex PTSD, intimacy development, mindfulness, and body-based healing. She's also on TikTok at Adele Martelle, and we'll put all that in the show notes. But she's amazing, and y'all have heard me obviously talk about Beecher being non-binary. Adele was the very first person I ever told about their dysphoria. And it was back when we didn't know what it was. So me and her go way, way back. And she's one of those people where you meet her and you just word vomit every personal private thing you've ever held on to, because she's just like one of those people that you instantly trust. So it makes perfect sense that she's a therapist and she's doing so many wonders in this world. But welcome, Adele.
Thank you,
Yeah,
April.
good to have you on. Super excited.
Mildly emotional. I don't know if that's how I wanted to go off with tears, but thank you. I mean, you are just such a place to me in my heart. And I don't think I would be able to have gone through everything that I went through if we didn't have our friendship. So I'm just so grateful for you and grateful to be with you all tonight and for this opportunity to share on this topic that's like truly passionate. So.
Yeah. So speaking of things that we went through, aka religious trauma,
that happened
side by side. So Beecher and I used to be part of this pretty large church back up in Virginia, and Adele was kind of had a reputation for being the loudmouth worship pastor's wife. She caused some, I don't know if drama is the right word, but
I just got called to the principal's office a lot.
The IFB preachers actively preach against women like you. You'll hear them up there like, the problem with this church is it's ran by the women, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I was never
your husband didn't keep you in good submission, apparently.
Oh yeah.
My husband flipped tables in the principal's office eventually.
Nice.
Yeah. So our stories apart, I know to us and all of us too, probably have some sort of religious trauma, but there's also, I know for me early on, it was hard for me to admit like, this is like trauma. This is religious trauma, because especially growing up in these evangelical spaces, your trauma is like not really a thing. It's like, oh no, you just pray about it. God heals you. And if you still have trouble, that's really a you thing. That's not because of anything deep or like inhibiting at all. Like that's just right. So like, I know there's something like kind of even healing of just knowing, like, just even saying out loud, like what religious trauma is or can look like, just to be able to see that in our own life. So
is it a thing, right?
Yeah. Is it real? There's a lot of, Twitter trolls that are like, religious trauma is not real. And,
only Christians would ask themselves if it's real.
Why is that?
Yeah, because, well, there's a couple of reasons, but I think, we're taught to, several of the things that April just mentioned, but also, anyone who is raised secular would look at religion in general and say, just like many other institutions, it has the potential to cause harm. And so only a Christian who has been taught to think that critical thinking is rebellious would doubt their intuition on whether something is traumatic or not. And trauma doesn't really give, can I cuss on this? I don't know. What can I?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Great. Perfect. I'm in good company. Yeah. Like trauma doesn't give a shit what you think about it. It doesn't.
Yeah. I'd say that.
It really doesn't give a shit what you're thinking about it. It's what you're feeling, because trauma is not what happened to you. It's how your nervous system embedded and made sense of how you were experiencing something that was incredibly overwhelming to your senses.
So can you define religious trauma for us? Like,
yeah, for sure.
If it's a thing, what is it?
Yeah. So religious trauma is unique in that it's a series of events or relationships or circumstances that are connected to spiritual practices or religious institutions where a person experienced dismissal of their sense of autonomy or their sense of ability to have control in the process. And they experienced all of this as overwhelming and disruptive. And so it has these negative effects on their mental health, their physical health, their social health, and their spiritual health. So that's religious trauma. And it looks a lot like complex PTSD. So when you think about PTSD, you're thinking probably like individual event-based. But when you think of complex PTSD, which is a lot of my work, it's more like a series of traumas on top of each other in various domains of your life and your overall holistic health. And that composition of those layered traumas creates the complexity in which you've identified your sense of self and safety in the world, and how you gain a sense of security and connection with others. And so because in religion and in church world and spiritual practice, we are not just learning what to believe, but we're learning how to interact, and we're learning how to interact in different domains. And then we don't just experience that when we're in our religious institution of practice in the building, but we also go home to a family most often where those things are being reiterated and there's a different spiritual leader. And so then oftentimes we get sent to Christian schools, and then there's another spiritual leader. And so we can see how there's this layered effect where someone is trying to make sense of their world and gain a sense of control and safety and connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it affects, I mean, if you're wondering like, okay, okay, that's great, I probably have it, but like, how do I know? Like, what would be some things that flare up for me? So I think of it like in symptoms in these domains within yourself. So like cognitive, right? So you're going to have like people who have religious trauma, we often see that with their cognition, their thinking, it's like a fancy word for thinking. We see that they really struggle with critical thinking because they were taught to follow authoritarian implication of knowledge and not necessarily to listen to their intuitive wisdom. And then it feels sinful to research and hear from others and to explore. It feels like a slippery slope, right? So with religious trauma, we see someone who is really in their thinking. They can often experience decision fatigue. They can experience reliance on others and not a core sense of self and thinking through what matters to them or feels good to them. And then also we see a lot of perfectionism. We see a lot of that black and white thinking and a lot of negative self-worth. Like that's a huge one for me. A lot of negative self-worth. So that's the cognition domain. And then we want to think about like the emotional, because in religious trauma, we're also seeing symptoms in the emotional domain. So we're looking at like grief. We're looking at depression, anxiety, but a huge one is shame. That's like a big indicator, right? So if there's this overall religious component, like oftentimes I'll have clients who be like, I don't think I have religious trauma, but they are like buried 6 feet under an internalized shame. And every time we're working through that shame, even when it's doing embodiment work, it's coming back to but God, but the word, but this. Yeah. And so it's having to gently navigate that this shame is really embedded in their understanding of their spiritual expression and helping them work through that. And then another area I would say,
go ahead, Adele.
Oh, okay. Another area I would say is like difficulty with pleasure. And so this can fall under the physical and the emotional. So we see a lot of disconnect and disembodiment, disorientation, dysphoria. And that's a huge piece of my work that I do with clients just as a body-based healer. And then also the social domain where we see like family rupture. So someone is saying like, I really want to think differently. I really want to ask these questions. I really want to challenge this system, or maybe I want to even stop attending, or I feel differently politically. And there's this rupture in the family system. So that's an indicator as well. But then also like isolation, when someone is experiencing that significant loss of support and community because they've been extradited and gossiped about or pushed out, or they're viewed now as like demonized in some way. And then lastly, I would say culturally, that's the last domain that I look at. And so this is looking at like how someone navigates the unfamiliarity of the secular world or experiences and interprets other faith traditions, how they make sense of their world, and if that's narrow or wide, and if that brings them more functionability or dysfunction. And then also looking at like developmental milestones that maybe have been disrupted because of the religiosity or the kind of rigid thing.
Yeah. I think that last observation is crazy fascinating, because I've found myself at times like catching up in areas that I wasn't. And sometimes there's very tangible things like listening to music from the mid 2000s that I never heard because I only listened to Christian music. Right. But like, there's so many other like social things that are also true in the same way. And so that I think that's crazy fascinating. And it's scary that it's so readily denied by so many people inside the church. I want to ask kind of a challenging question here.
Sure, go for it.
Is it possible to be a part of Christianity in the modern American evangelical church and to not experience trauma? I guess what I'm really asking is there any way to be a part of evangelicalism and be healthy?
And can I piggyback on that question? I want to, because I was going to say shame is the very heart of evangelicalism. You're worthless. You were born a sinner because Adam ate a piece of fruit. You're lucky that God doesn't just open up the ground and swallow you up. Jesus, is there saving you. But if, WWJD, and if you're doing the wrong thing and Jesus comes back, you're going to be left behind. I mean, shame is the very basis of the religion, isn't it?
And it's the same dude we worship. Like he has the power, the authority to heal the legs of an all-star quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. Fuck those 46,000 people over there who are going to lose their lives, but he's going to heal Patrick Mahomes. Like it just,
or send a special revival to students in Kentucky, but the earthquake on the other side of the world is like, God doesn't care about that side.
No. Little too brown over there, probably. Jesus has got to save all these white folks. Sorry, I'm going.
So I guess, Adele, back to the original question.
No, I love it. I love it.
How can somebody be evangelical and not be traumatized by it?
Yeah. I'm going to give you an answer that you're going to like. And then I'm going to, as a good therapist, I'm going to give you an answer that pushes back. To make
I love this. I love this so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So first I would say no.
Right.
Here's how.
If you were my therapist, you would say, I don't know. What do you think, Paul?
Right, yeah. You don't have me on here to do that, though.
No. We need full sin, my friend.
Yeah. So here's the thing. What evangelicalism does is it puts someone in a double bind. Okay. And so what a double bind is it essentially says, and this is because of like eternal damnation and original sin. And so it says like, you are guilty and therefore you are also responsible if you don't do these certain things because of your guilt, your original sin that you're born with, to eternal damnation. Okay. And yet you have no ability to do anything about it, right? Because you don't ultimately get to decide. You don't ultimately get to know whether it worked or not. So there's this deep double bind that can create this perpetuation and this cycle of not just abuse, but also shame, right? So in that sense, I think if you are evangelical and you truly believe in original sin and you're operating in that double bind, I don't know how you can move through that. In my experience in counseling clients, I have not seen how someone can operate in that without some sort of internalized shame that then bleeds out to affect other areas of their life. That was the answer I thought you'd like. Let me give you the other answer. I don't know a person who's made it through their family unscathed.
Yeah, so I figured that was going to be the pushback was that, but think about all of these other situations that innately cause trauma as well, just by the nature of relationships, right? Or connections. And I love that perspective. My question to that though is like with family trauma and family circumstances, because of the way that works, right? Like if I've got issues with my parents or whatever, I didn't have a choice in that. There wasn't a boundary to set because I was born into that. Right.
Same with your faith tradition oftentimes too.
But that's what I'm saying is that I think the difference is is that at some point, like, I think we need to realize, okay, this is not healthy.
Yeah.
I need to start setting boundaries up in
Yes.
places to keep my mental health safe, if
100%.
that makes sense.
And we need churches that teach that, if churches are going to
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
And so here, what you're talking about, two things you're talking about there. Okay. You're talking about when you're born into a faith tradition that you practice, because the evangelical faith perpetuates a lack of critical thinking and actually shames people for it. What happens is that we adopt we adopt an adaptive coping skill for trauma,
Yes.
which is disassociation. And so in order to operate within that system, you have to separate from your own intuitive wisdom. You have to shut that down in some way.
Yes.
Okay. So there's that piece. The other thing that you're describing, and then after I say this, I'll because I don't want to as a therapist, I don't ever like being like, isn't that horrible? But then not telling you where you can go. Okay. So like,
well, yeah. Here's the problem, but here's the solution.
Yeah, I don't
right?
do that. I don't do that. We don't like that. So like, here's the thing. The other thing you're describing is what we refer to as like locus of control. Okay. So at some point, after being taught and fed that knowledge is not discovered, but it is revealed, we have to learn to operate with an internal locus of control. And that is a lot of my work that I do with people in recovery from religious trauma. A big, huge front end chunk of the work is, how do we get you to a place where you can operate from an internal locus of control? This doesn't mean that you don't ever take in external information as wisdom. But this does mean that we have to turn that part of you back on. And the only way to turn that part of you back on is to give you a sense of safety again. And so we start to evaluate, what would safety look like for you as you are moving through deconstruction, leaving a community, reconstruction, even should someone choose. And so we talk about the layers of safety, which is awareness, which is actually like movement, believe it or not. And then also moving through safety in the sense of like decision-making, planning, hopes, goals, and dreams, which is the one that nobody talks about. But that is a big part of locus of control.
And I think what's so important about that, and in some ways, you almost don't even need the solution right away, because I just think somebody like you, Adele, saying religious trauma is a thing, is real, you get to feel, because what we hear a lot in the deconstruction world, right, guys, I'm sure April and Jeremy can relate, is, well, you're just hurt. You've just been hurt. You should look to God, not to man.
Or they say like, oh, you're just,
because you're hurt.
Just because they think, oh, someone was mean to you at church once. They think
Remember,
the church hurt
that
you.
was the people. That wasn't Jesus. Like that's their favorite line. It was the people. That wasn't God.
Jesus will never fail you.
So they're really going to love
it. So permission is, to me, permission in and of itself to say it is a real thing is huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It's also, the idea of like being able to allow those, like what comes up, to be acceptable and to create safe space for people to have those things come up. And one of the biggest challenges that people recovering from religious trauma, whether it's Christian or another faith, is anger. Ironically, right? Like that one is so hard for people.
We don't allow that in the church. Anger is not allowed. Joy comes in the morning. Come on.
I tell my clients all the time, like when they're sitting with me and they're like, it's been a year, I shouldn't be this angry. And my question is like, okay, well, what is that? What information can you get from that? Why might your body still feel anger? Why might that still have presence? What information is that giving us about how safe you feel or how secure and connected you feel? What other areas do you need to expand and to give permission so that anger can not be in the driver's seat necessarily, but give it a seat on the car. I don't want to say bus because I'm not Driscoll in this, but give it a seat on the car.
I have never loved any conversation more than this one. I think this hits so close to home for me. And probably, I mean, so many of us, right? Like it's not just me, but it's kind of like when you're sitting in the pew, preacher, you were preaching at me today or whatever. But it feels that way in the sense that, I think that as evangelicals as a whole, we do all of these things, and this suppression of feelings, and poor communication, and being gaslit, and I mean all of those things. But then on top of that, y'all all know this. Everybody on the screen understands this from being on staff or being a part, being a family of staff or whatever. It's like tenfold worse than just being, somebody that sits in a pew on a Sunday. So I got asked to do, and I'm not trying to like promote this here, but I'm just saying I got asked to do a TED Talk in April, and the title of my talk is going to be Jesus is Killing Me. And it's literally walking through that, that moment of like where I had driven out somewhere I was going to take my own life. And it was all because I didn't have enough faith. I hadn't prayed hard enough, like all of those things. And then this journey coming to where I am now has been filled with really great therapy and learning all of this, like really deep knowledge, that, you're sharing with our listeners, tonight. And so I just have to pause and say how thankful I am for that. And I'm glad that we have folks that are spending their time, and using their gifts and their profession, to shed some light on this, because the church is actively pushing back against it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things first, before I start that, let me just say, Jeremy, thank you for sharing that. Because I know just even sometimes like having to say those words all over again can in and of itself bring up things. So I just want to honor that for you right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I think one of the things I talk about with church leaders who are open to having discussions with me about this, because I do have clients who are church leaders, is what the difference would be between how we are reactive, the church is reactive, versus proactive. And unfortunately, in the Western evangelical church, one of the things we see is that they think they have to be the answer. Because if they're not the answer, then somehow Jesus isn't the answer. And if Jesus isn't the answer, then everyone's going to hell. Talk about a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Right? Quick. For all the times I got told I was on a slippery slope, now I'm like, the slope really? Like,
yeah.
Okay. I think they have a toboggan and they're going very fast, but it's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, the slippery slope really is believing in the rapture, and then next thing you know, you're QAnon.
Yeah, yeah. You just wake up one day with a MAGA hat and you don't even know how you showed up here. Yeah.
Right. But what happens is that, like, if churches and if ministries in general, and not just churches, but other institutions, right? Mosques, synagogues, so forth. But in particular with the evangelical church, if they could view themselves as a tool, a resource. Oh, Denise is you're welcome. Thank you, Dennis. Then, and opposed to the answer, we would actually start to see some equilibrium, some homeostasis happening in Christian culture. And instead, they think they have to have it figured out. So they've created their own counseling programs. They've created their own resources, still all within the church. And the thing about abusive cultures is that they keep you isolated, and they say, we are the one who you can't go anywhere else. If you go anywhere else, it's not safe. It's not going to be real. It's not going to be as helpful. Yeah. And so we've actually really polluted. They've polluted their ability to give Jesus and to access healing.
All of this.
Yeah. And even just like, even if you were to go outside your circles, because I remember being encouraged to meet, quote unquote, unsaved friends, but it was never to actually be friends with them, like just be friends. It was always with this ulterior motive that I would get them to our church and get them saved and save their eternal soul. So there was always this, like the thoughts that I would have in my head if I had a friend who was not a Christian, of if they said something that was like sinful or whatever. Yeah. And then my my internal alarms would be going off, being like, oh, should I say something? Am I enabling this sin by like not saying something? And just,
Right.
am I sending this person to hell by not saying something about this right now?
Even
And just tragic.
Yep.
y'all thought LuLaRoe was dope. Evangelicalism is the best MLM there is.
Mhm.
Well, LuLaRoe is in evangelicalism pretty much. So.
Well, yes, no,
The
I know
amount of
they go
pop-up
hand in
parties
hand.
I went to from
You
church.
had a great collection going of leggings for a while,
I
April.
still have them. I
Nice.
Dope leggings, though.
can't quite get rid of them. I spent so much money on those. I got sucked in.
My wife had so many dope leggings that came from them, but I just listen, like it stinks really bad now. But yeah, evangelicalism's an MLM.
Adele, I was going. So, like you said, the word secular earlier. That and I I put it out. That's a trigger word for me. Secular, the secular world out there, and I made the promo for the show this week, and somewhat jokingly, like, "Ooh, I'm triggered by this revival in Kentucky," but I really am not joking, and
Right.
I'd love to hear you. I'm kind of I really have like trying to be self-reflective, and my wife and I bounce things off each other, and she's like, well, if it's blessing them, what's wrong with it? And I'm like, shut this down. This is because revival is something we pursued all our Christian lives, and revival to us meant having long worship services every night of the week. And now when I see it, when I see that in Kentucky, I am triggered by it.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear your feedback on like, why the trigger? Why the trigger when I hear secular music or some old hymn like "For 1,000 Tongues to Sing"? What is happening inside of us when we get triggered by some of those things?
That is great, but go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, so many thoughts, Paul. That's a great question, and it's got a lot of dynamic to it. So let me try and grab my ADD brain and hone in how to really answer that, because I could go so many places. Okay, so if you were a client and you were asking me that, the first thing I would say to you is, when you tell me you're triggered, can you tell me when you first felt that feeling?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wednesday? No.
Yeah. I don't know, what day did that stupid revival start?
Yeah, because that's triggers are familiar feelings in our bodies, right? And I think that to stay on the course, so anyone who's listening who has religious trauma, we often want to move to our head, because if we feel like we can wrap our mind around something, we can stay safe. But again, trauma doesn't give a shit what you're thinking. And so it's better for you to go back into what you're feeling. So I would want to know from my client, like, when did you first feel that feeling? Because that trigger is not just like the same thing every time. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's disloyalty, betrayal, grief, right? On and on and on. So if I was doing work with you, I'd be less concerned about why it triggers you, and I'd be more concerned about how it triggers you, because that's information for me to know, so I can sit with you, A, and hold space for that, but B, also help you learn where you are in your journey. Because if you stay in your head with that trigger, what happens is now you just become a lip smacker like them. We don't want to do that. We don't want to spin. We've done that enough in our journey, right? That's behind us now. We're going to live embodied lives. We're going to be fully present. We're not going to just say all bad, all good, because that's what we are actually prone to doing, because that's how we were raised. So I want to move you to a different place in your operation.
It's so interesting, because I was listening to music on YouTube while I was driving the other day, and a really, really old Vineyard worship song came on that I loved back in the day. And I really, this whole thought process started of like, oh no, not this song, but oh, I really love this song, but oh, it's talking about a vision of God that I don't believe in anymore. Oh, but it still like stirs my heart, And I had this whole wrestling match of, am I allowed to like this song or not? And finally, I think I was just like, fuck them. I'm going to enjoy this song,
Yes. Oh, yes. Fuck them is right. Yes, absolutely. And the them is many things. And that's what I work on with clients. That the them, like them is plural, truly. So it's the people who have hurt you. It's the rules in your head. It's
Mhm.
the rules you've even made about your healing from religious trauma.
Mm.
Ooh.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So I can be them then too.
Oh
Oof.
shit. I
Yeah.
love how she's just sitting over there like, yeah,
I don't
I'm
like
like
that
dropped
answer.
your ass. Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
The
That
beauty
I
of it
had,
all, I tell people a lot, by the way, is well, Jesus was hurt by the church too, and I don't
Yeah,
think that invalidated everything that he said.
exactly. So the place we would move to is compassion, because
Mm.
that's the place that we didn't get permission to operate in except for with others, right? So, and oftentimes it was surface.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, how can you have compassion for yourself that you're having this pull tug with it? And how can you sit dialectically with that pull tug and with that fuck them and say that these two things can be true at the same time? This song can have abiding deep meaning for me, and it resonates in me somewhere that is holy.
Mhm.
And at the same time, equally as important, can you say, oh crap, this is like so
Mm.
triggering, and I don't believe much of this anymore. And just because I don't believe it, it doesn't mean it doesn't have value, but it doesn't have the value it held on me. Now
Mhm.
I hold it, right? So it's this back and forth.
It's
Mm.
like because, and that's such a great point, because in evangelicalism you are taught that everything is like black and white, good and bad. Like there is no, we don't operate in the gray. And I think part of my healing and my process, the biggest thing has been being okay with the gray. Like not everything is a right or wrong answer. Not everything is ordained by God or not.
Yeah.
And all of that's so important. And so that is so fascinating to think about, like, that those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Like this could still play a role in my life and in my heart and still bring good vibes in, but then
Yeah.
like it can also still like be something that's under examination in my new heart. So
Yes. I love
yeah.
that term. Under
Mhm.
examination. I often say, can we get curious about that, right? Like, can we
Nice.
expand our
Yeah.
curiosity? Can we give ourselves permission to sit with this and hold both at the same time? I also tell my clients too that like that it's very appropriate if that's not where you're at. Like if you can't hold the two at the same time, right? Like maybe that's like further along. It's okay for it to not be there. It's okay because it's about gaining safety. And when we have trauma, what happens is that what you needed to feel safe, to feel secure, you couldn't do. You couldn't
Mhm.
fight, you couldn't flight, you couldn't freeze. You probably could fawn, but that wasn't healthy for you. And you couldn't collapse. You had to keep going and show up every Sunday, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
So you
Mhm.
couldn't react, you couldn't respond the way you needed to. And so part of the healing journey of religious trauma is getting into that place where you do respond the way you need to. If a song comes on and it is triggering, you do turn it off if that's what the reaction is you need. If
Mm.
you run into someone and they from church and they start talking to you and it doesn't feel good, to say I have to go, and to not hold that and suppress that and fawn, right? So there is a season of learning how to appropriately and timely pick up on those internal bodily cues and to give yourself
Mm.
the permission to reorient to those so you can
Mm.
get your sense of safety and control back.
It makes me think of, and sorry if I jumped in before you, April, but the even if I get cancer, I'm supposed to praise God for that. If I lose a limb, God has a plan, or lose a child. I've been at funerals before where like God's going to use this for the glory of the kingdom. I mean, I don't know if that's
That
the
makes me go
definition of gaslighting, but it feels like gaslighting to me.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
I was just gonna say, as far as triggers go, one thing that I've noticed, and I don't know where guilt falls into religious trauma, but I'll be triggered by something, whether it's like a worship service. Usually I'm more triggered by Pentecostal type services, which is, I think, why Asbury hasn't been as triggering for me, because they're not Pentecostal. I think that's the best thing it's got going for it. But I find myself being angry And then I try to be self-aware. Like my therapist tells me that I know my feelings, but I don't know how to feel my feelings, which is totally fair because I'm like, why am I feeling this? And so I get to the root of it pretty quick. And when I've got to the root, for me, a lot of times the anger really is rooted in I'm angry at these people, but really I feel guilty because that was me and the part that I had played in this machine and didn't
Oh yeah.
get out earlier and didn't recognize things earlier. Like sometimes I'm like, you idiot. Like, why didn't you see all these things and how you were being manipulated? That's something that I still really wrestle with. And it doesn't help when you get commenters that are like, because there's like fundamentalists on the other side too. There's like fundamentalist atheists
Yeah.
that come into my thing that like
Yeah.
still call me an idiot for
Yeah.
still having any sort of faith after all of this. But that's still something that is just a very deep struggle that I'm not sure how to get past.
Yeah. That's not uncommon, actually, what you're describing. And I think that's that can often come. Okay, two parts to this. That can often prevent anyone from engaging the healing journey of the religious trauma. So I just really commend you for everything you've done, because that can be a huge block to even wanting to go into it, is knowing that you are a participant and potentially you caused harm too. Right. And so that can be such an overwhelming sensation that it can just keep you in the system. It's easier to stay where that's accepted. And I'm not confronted with that. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that's on the back end of healing, is like an important part of that compassion piece, where I don't want to use a term that like sounds very AA, but like making amends, like being able to recognize your own part. And I watch you do this I think you do it through your videos. Okay.
Right.
So like, but some people, like I know my husband and I were leaders in a church, right? So I've had conversations in order to move through my own healing. I needed to let people say, it was really harmful when you guys said that I was at this stage where I was just acting like a regular teenager, but you guys were upset with me that I was drinking or I was doing this, and you said I couldn't lead worship that weekend. But I was just experimenting like a regular teenager, and here I was not being able to operate in something, right? And I needed to let people say to me, like, that felt icky, that felt awful, and you were part of that. And for me to not take that and go, oh God, ugh, and then shame myself more, but to see that as freedom, that someone feels safe enough with me and I've made myself accessible enough to allow that conversation to happen, and that is freedom. And that's what we're shooting for.
That's really good. And so is there a part of this that I mean, I can say what I did that hurt people, I was doing for God. I had a call on my life that I was following, and I understand that it was man's interpretation. I guess my question I'm asking that is, can I be mad at God for some of this? Do we need permission to say fuck them and them include God or the interpretation I was given of God or whatever's out there for not coming and stopping me in the midst of the process, because I thought I was doing it out of a command from an eternal supreme being that I was supposed to be pursuing.
If you believe in a puppet master God, that would work.
Yeah.
But if you don't, that's not going to help you. But what will help you is to know that God is, as someone may understand or experience God's capacity to hold your disappointment in Him is way bigger than ours, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's there. Acknowledge it. You can be mad at God. God is most likely, I mean, I can't speak for God, but they are probably okay with that, I'm guessing. Like, I think they've got...
The Psalms would seem to indicate so, yeah.
Yeah, but the other piece of it that I think is more important is in that compassion healing part, where you do the work, where you take ownership, you become accessible, you make amends, and then you recognize that as freedom. The other piece of it is to also recognize that you were operating within a narrative that you had been fed. And so it doesn't mean you take the blame away, but you can take the guilt away now. You can take the shame away now, because in the
Yeah.
same way that you will probably gain compassion for them, that they know now what they do, but they know, like, you knew what you were doing, but you didn't know. Like, I think, again, you have to find yourself in that place of that compassion where you allow that thing to not be so definitive.
So is it fair though? Like what I've done, I think, is give myself permission to not believe in that God,
Mm,
that God is a being on a throne with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose,
yeah.
that God is something completely different than anything I ever knew. And
Yeah.
I guess I feel like I I'm so I don't know if it's healthy or if I'm just rejecting it because I'm pissed, but I feel like I can't interact with that God anymore. I'm looking for some different version of God out there that seems to be more like what I think God should be than a guy on a throne deciding who wins the Super Bowl this year.
So that's called movement, and that is part of trauma healing.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because you're moving towards, you're actively engaging and recognizing that that God is not safe for you. That version
Yeah.
of God is not safe for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Okay, let's.
Oh, she froze.
Oh
She
no.
froze.
I think she was going to take us to Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's run the mid roll. Maybe we'll get April back in the process.
Sure.
And then on the other side, we're going to do a little, we'll do a little Q&A with
Sure.
Adele, the therapist.
Some
like
of you have
Steve.
already put questions in the chat, but if you have another one, put it in there and we'll hit it after the
If you
mid-roll.
write books, you should just like use how old you are.
You
as
should probably
as
re-put the
title.
questions in so we don't have to scroll back if it was a while ago and find them.
All right, we'll be right back with Adele Martelle.
Evangelicalish. Follow us to catch all the latest content and encouragement. You can check us out on TikTok by following @Evangelicalish or subscribe on YouTube by searching Evangelicalish. That's evangelical with an ISH. And don't forget to catch our live streams each and every single Wednesday night on YouTube at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 Pacific. And now back to the Evangelicalish podcast.
I know
Welcome
we
back.
did. We
lost April.
We lost
her.
April.
Back.
Oh, there she is.
Welcome
Real
back
quick.
to information.
Back like I never left. All right. Anyway, yes, awesome. Super grateful for this conversation. I know so many of our listeners are as well. And so interested to get some Q&A going from our folks in the chat. For those of you who don't know, if you just listen to the podcast, and you've been under the Evangelicalish rock, you can join us live on Wednesday nights, 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. And you can actually throw in, when you're like, who are these commenters on a podcast? It's live on YouTube. So come follow us at Evangelicalish on all the things. And we would love to read your comments as well.
So Paul in the chat says, once our critical thinking is turned back on, how do we deal with people who haven't turned theirs back on?
Don't. No, I'm kidding.
A boundary.
That's it. No, really, that's the answer, right? I was being a smartass, but the answer really is boundaries. But oftentimes boundaries is like a term that's overused, kind of like narcissistic and stuff like that now, like just gets in gaslighting. It just gets misused, right?
Yeah.
So let me be specific. Boundaries, when we hear that, we often think of like either ultimatums or we think of external boundaries. What I would say, Paul, is think of what your personal internal boundaries are first. So when I work with clients on this, I ask them in the areas of spirituality, physical health, mental health, where are you willing to go in conversation and in presence, and how much and how far? Once you make those decisions about yourself, like I have areas that I just do not discuss with certain people because I am aware that either I'm going to feel like I'm chasing them or I'm going to get worked up and have nowhere to go with it in the conversation. And that's not helpful for me. That's actually pretty hurtful for me in my healing journey. And so I have to know my own internal boundaries within those various domains. And once I know that first, then it can become more clear in what boundaries I need to communicate with others who may not have that capacity. It's not that they don't have the capacity. Everyone has the capacity. It's that they haven't given themselves permission or haven't had practice at critical thinking.
Mm, that's good. All right, this one's from West. She says, what are your thoughts on Christian counseling?
Oh,
She
this is
laughed.
this is a feisty one. Okay, so I'll just say I have my own business on the side that I do, but I also am part of a group practice that is a true psychotherapy practice that only hires people who, it's not my business, I'm part of it, that hires licensed psychotherapists, but they also brand themselves as Christian. It offers Christian counseling, right? So
Yeah.
in that sense, all licensed therapists are guided by an ethical standard. And that ethical standard means that they have to meet you where you're at and cannot impose their own views on you. I feel safer with that type of Christian counseling. But I also think that Christian counseling, specifically for religious trauma, is hit or miss. And you really have to know what's best for you. If it's best to see someone who has the same faith tradition, who operates as a Christian counselor, that may not work in your season of recovery. Christian counseling in general can be harmful. I'm trying to tiptoe.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
It can be harmful when the therapist operates predominantly only from that training domain.
Yeah.
If it is someone who is held to an ethical licensing standard and they are trained in multiple modalities and various other specialties specific to your diagnosis, should you choose it to be part of your treatment, then it can be very beautiful.
I would say on that, I had a counselor who was wonderful and we did some great work together. I knew the counselor was a Christian, therapist, psychologist actually was a Christian, came from that. And they did a great job of keeping that out of our regular interaction. But I still had a sense that they had an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
There was this underlying, well, I'm going to let you say anything, do anything, talk about anything, but we still want to get you to the Christian end of this. And I began to feel that agenda and finally, went to another. So I think we all have some underlying agenda that sometimes it may be hard to get away from.
What about those biblical pastoral counselors?
Oh,
If you're listening, my head's shaking.
I knew that was the answer, but I just wanted to ask it anyway.
I'm not saying they don't ever hold value. Okay, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
I have too much lived experience to do that. Right, too much of my own wisdom to know to throw that. I know not to do that. So I'm not saying they don't hold value. I'm not saying they can't speak into your life. I'm just saying for someone who has religious trauma, that can be really dangerous and harmful. And I think that biblical counselors do not have trauma-informed training and are not equipped.
Yes.
In my personal opinion, in my professional personal opinion, they are not equipped to formally treat any degree of trauma. And they are not formally trained to handle various resources and techniques that are needed to safely guide clients through various challenges, situations, and diagnoses.
All that. That's so at the church that I pastor, our policy is, and our pastoral staff will say this: we will do life with you. In other words, like you seek counsel from your friends or whoever, right? Like your circle. Like we will do life with you, and we intentionally say it that way. But we will not counsel you.
Yeah.
We will refer you to a really great list of professionals who are held to, like you mentioned, an ethical standard, right? And some of these folks are in faith-based practices. Some of them are not. And but they're all just really great at their job and what they do. And so, I partnered with 988 here in Oklahoma City, which is an incredible resource. And that's been a huge thing for me in the mental health space, has been encouraging pastors to say, I don't do counseling.
Yeah.
Like calling
Yeah.
out pastors, like,
Yeah.
get that out of your vernacular. Like your vernacular. Stop saying you counsel people. Like I can do. Yeah.
When I was a senior pastor, our liability carrier told me, if you have 3 consecutive meetings on the same topic with a person from your church, you are now legally a counselor and are liable for counseling law, HIPAA law, and a whole bunch of things. So they told us, don't ever say the word counseling. You can do pastoral care. But they said, if you meet 3 times in a row, consecutive meetings on that same topic, you are now, by legal standards, a counselor, which I found super interesting, and also gave me,
Here, I do think that there's something to be said about creating support structures within churches. This, again, like I could like preach this all day about how the church wants so badly to be the answer to everything. But the reality is that like what they're missing the moment, right? Where they could create support structures for various thematic challenges. Okay. And then within these support structures, they could have people who have years of experience to certain degrees, right? Like I'm just like brainstorming out my ass right now, but like there's just ideas that people could do that would be more ethical for the church and more sufficient in creating safety within the church to normalize thematic changes and stressors and chaos that we all go through life. But instead they want everybody to go to the small group and they want them to talk about what the pastor talked about on Sunday.
Yeah.
But
yes, they do.
You're missing a moment, man.
but your assumption there is that, it's really easy for us to look at and say, oh, you want this like safety or whatever, but they don't. That's
I agree with you.
Is that they don't
as
care.
Consumers, we need to own a piece of this. I agree.
Yeah. They don't want it to be safe for you. They don't care if it's safe for you.
I think that another aspect of this Christian counseling idea is, I can remember the first time I ever told a couple in our church, I think you probably should get divorced. Like, and I felt like I was going to hell as a senior pastor to tell somebody, you guys are going to kill each other. One of you needs to move out. Because I couldn't do anything anymore for them. And so again, but there was something in the back of my head saying, no, divorce is evil. God can heal anything, fix this. And so I think when you're doing Christian counseling, it's hard to overcome those preconception and God voices in your head.
I 1000%, that so resonates with me. The first time I told a couple, like, there is only 2 ways this ends. Either one of y'all is going to be on the first 48 for murdering the other one, or y'all need to like find a way to co-parent and split. Like those are the 2 best options for you right now. And I'll respect whatever you decide, but I will help the police. So like,
because you're not held to an ethical standard. Whereas I would have to keep it HIPAA and could not help the police.
Here's a question. This is from Lori. Sorry, Jeremy, did you have one more thing to say there?
No. I was just going to say, that's the other crazy thing about this, talking about ethical standards, is that pastors are not they're not mandatory reporters in a lot of states. And so you raise a really good point about that as well. So anyway.
Yeah, we are out here in CA. But Lori says, what are your thoughts, Adele, on Brene Brown's work on shame? Oh.
No. What are your thoughts on Brene Brown? Let's just start there.
I love Brene Brown. She's great.
Okay.
I don't know her personally, but I think that I think that there is, one day I'm going to write a book and there's going to be parts of it that are incredibly meaningful. And there's going to be parts of it that 10 years later, I wish I'll write a different book to correct what I wrote, right? Like this is just the nature of our field. Okay. It's an evolving field. And she was a researcher who got thrown into the self-help field. So I think that her paradigm on shame is incredibly useful and powerful. I think that what could be talked about more is how do I explain this? How like violence is part of this. So like domestic violence, violence within the church, and just the extreme element of shame, right? It's more than just feeling. And it's so much more, and it's just needs so much more resource and work. And so I love her work, and I think she is a very educated person. I have nothing against her. Who am I to speak? But I just think it's one paradigm on shame. And I think, like, you know, if you want to look at Gabriel Maté, he's got another paradigm on shame. You want to look at Jesus Christ, got another paradigm on shame. There's lots of options, and we shouldn't just say one is the gospel.
Yeah. Wait, but you mentioned Jesus in there. He is the gospel.
I mean,
I see what you did, and I love it so much.
Jeremy.
We're gonna unpack that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll cost a copay. I'm just
Jesus
kidding.
charged a copay.
Yeah,
I'm trying
no,
to know what would Jesus' paradigm on shame be? Is that the set the captives free, open the eyes of the blind? I'm trying to think what his statement on shame would be from the Gospels.
Yeah.
I think it's John 3:17. Jesus wasn't sent to condemn the world, but to sozo it, to reconcile it to its true identity.
I was just talking about Mark chapter 7 this past week, where, you know, Jesus is like called Levi as a disciple, and then, you know, the religious establishment of the time is having this conversation around him about, like, you know, why does he always eat with the sinners and the tax collectors? And I think the more I read that text and the more I see Jesus's like heart in the text that we see, I almost think he answers that like in a sarcastic way. Like I didn't come for those who are well. I mean, y'all have it all figured out, right? You know, like we've all had conversations like that with our kids. Well, you know what you're doing. You're fine. You know, don't take my advice, you know, that kind of thing. I think Jesus was saying that I didn't come for y'all. I came for the people who are sick. You think they're sick, but I'm here for them. And I think that is Jesus saying a lot in that exchange. And even the woman at the well, where he, you know, she's there in the middle of the day because she feels shame from the culture. But Jesus approaches her, humbles himself before her first, and asks her for a favor.
Yes.
Right. And so I think Jesus on shame is, you know, don't feel shameful. Like find yourself peace, find yourself worth.
I think that Jesus' approach on shame continually shows us that we still have purpose, and to actually move away from the experience of shame and move into experience. I think that's what Jesus shows us from time to time. And so Jesus asks the woman to do something for him, not because he can't do it himself, but to give her the experience of moving and doing and conversing and being fully present and useful. We all want to be useful. We all want to have meaning. And I think that Jesus continually reminds us of that.
And, you know, we were taught so often that, you know, when Jesus was like, well, the man that you're with now is not your husband, and, you know, you've had 5 husbands before him or whatever, that's like, because of that space that comes out of, it's like Jesus was judging her for, you know, her divorces and being shacked up with somebody or whatever. But I think what was really happening there, and it's so key to this conversation, is that he was saying, no. I know all the things of why you feel shame around these people, but I still came to you. I still brought my barriers down for you. And I said, I want to humble myself. I want something from you. And so I think there's something really powerful in that.
And I think, Jeremy, we can see that is her response was not, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't be living with this guy.
Exactly.
Her response was, oh, you're a prophet. I want to hear more,
Yeah.
tell me more. And then
And I'm going to go tell my friends.
I'm going to go get every friend I have and say, come meet this guy. And so,
Yeah.
it's a very different thing.
And he never was like, get out of the house with that man that's not your husband. Like
Right.
that never happened. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus just handled things on a different level. But I love the idea of like, he showed humility to her to give her value and give her worth. And then
that's the opposite of shame.
Yes, he gave her worth, and then was like, no, I know all your shit. Like I've read your email. Like I saw that, but you still are worth something to me, and that's strong.
But I would also say even more than just being worth something to me, I would say that you're worth something to your community.
Say that. Yeah, and yourself. You're worth something to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a virgin on your wedding night to be worthy.
I actually think it's what the go and sin no more passage means. Jesus is like, where are your condemners? She said, they're gone. You chased them away. He says, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. I mean, what I hear him saying in that is like, nobody gets to call you a sinner anymore, and she may have been a prostitute who had to go back to prostitution because she had no other way to make a living. And he says, you're not condemned. You're completely free from condemnation. And so to me, that's how the other story I love about, as we've gone theological here, about shame is the interaction with the religious guys. I see it where they're like, Jesus, we know who our father is. Our father's Abraham. And I have heard and see in that passage of and there is some thought of, Jesus was born of this virgin birth, but there are others that say, no, he actually was a bastard. And that was a really shameful thing to be. And they were saying, oh yeah, you're such a good teacher. By the way, we know who our father is. Do you know who yours is? Where's your father? And his response was like, no, we're not playing this game. And so to me, that's a good way of, he knew his identity to overcome shame and say, you can try to put me down with that stuff, but I'm not playing that game with you guys.
But I know who I am.
I know who I am.
Which part of religious trauma recovery? There you go.
Yeah,
it's what I think he was doing out there on the mountain all night long, was getting that identity back in order.
Yeah.
Listen, as hard as deconstruction is, as hard as, walking through some of this religious trauma is, like, and just navigating those things, Jesus is still just so fucking dope. Like I don't know any other way to say it, but
write that down.
Jesus is just that guy. Like,
you won't see that on a church merch t-shirt.
We should make a merch shirt that says Jesus is fucking dope. I would wear that everywhere.
That would just confuse so many people.
Trigger the shit out of some people.
I mean, I'm
confused.
confused.
I don't know what to do. It's like the 2023 version of Jesus is my homeboy, because I remember like my parents thought that was so disrespectful. Yeah, with the white Jesus. I remember my parents being like, that's so disrespectful. He's the Lord. Wait until I come up with this shirt. I'll give it to him for Christmas. Jesus is fucking dope.
How about he's the ultimate OG or something?
Well, okay. Thank you, Adele. I know that I feel like we barely scratched the surface of religious trauma. Like, we didn't even talk about purity culture or like the individual like groups that it harms, like people of color, women, and queer people. Like, that's a very specific type of religious trauma that is, I feel like, goes much deeper. But you have a platform and you talk about this some on TikTok and on Instagram. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah. So my handle is Adele Martelle and I'm on Instagram and TikTok, and I have a website, which is myname.com. So adelemartelle.com. And that's where people can find me. I'll be doing a group in June that is accessible for anyone. That's going to be like a educational recovery group for purity culture. Actually, it's an online group, so that'll be coming up in the future. Exciting. I have a co-host who's going to be doing that with me. So yeah, a couple cool things coming up in the future.
That sounds awesome. And if you're listening, we will put all of those links in the show notes. So
You should come back and do one of our ish unplugged with us.
Okay. I would be
I
honored.
think that'd be a blast to have you on for
mm.
some behind the scenes, like real sketchy conversation about purity.
You could do a
culture.
group therapy with us.
Yeah. Oh no, no.
Listen, Adele and I have
No.
stories
We do.
that we
go
aren't
back.
really telling publicly, but we could tell
Oh my goodness, girl.
privately.
Sometimes they just hit me. Sometimes I'll be like washing my hair, and then I'm like,
Yeah, yeah. That shit was real. That shit actually happened. Yeah.
You know, I did a 10-week intensive outpatient therapy thing where we did group therapy 4 days a week. And I was really sitting in that room every day thinking, this is what church should be. Yeah, like this is the best church I've ever been to. Let's all cut our intestines open and put all our shit out on the table together and say, I'm fucked up like this. How about you? You know, and then we walk it through together. It was the best church I've ever been in.
oh, that makes my heart happy for you. That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate
Awesome,
it. It's so
Adele.
great to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, where can folks find? Where can people register for that seminar that you're hosting? Just on your website, Adele?
Yeah, it's not up yet.
Martelle.com?
So if they register like for my like a newsletter, they'll be enrolled and then they'll get updated once it's up and running for registration. So it's not up for registration yet, but it'll be coming up. So if they there's like a little box on my webpage on the first page, scroll down to like get info from me.
Mm.
So,
and for the audio folks, we probably it's Martelle. Martelle.
Yes. Yeah. And as April mentioned, we'll do our best to have all of those links in our show notes as well. So
cool. Thanks, guys.
Awesome stuff, guys.
Yeah, this was a blast.
Somebody take us home.
All right. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us tonight. Don't forget to leave us a review, 5 stars, and especially on Apple and Spotify, write a review and tell people why they should listen to the Evangelicalish podcast. Otherwise, we're super grateful for each and every single one of you. Go to evangelicalish.com and join the Ish community. It's as little as $5. And there's just some really great behind the scenes content, some chat boards, all of those things there. So join us in those spaces. We would love to do it. Next week I'll show up to the right live stream. But otherwise, for Adele and April and Paul, I'm Jeremy. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you next week.
All right. Good night.